I remember one Sunday after Mass at a small Vietnamese parish in San Jose, an elderly woman gently took my hand and asked, "Father, how can I live out my faith wisely now that I'm old? I forget things and I don't pray as clearly as before." Before I could respond, she added, "I may not be able to explain theology, but I still know how to trust in God. That's something I haven't lost." I smiled, quietly moved by her sincerity. Her question stayed with me for days. In the later years of life, we become experts in many things: raising families, navigating the healthcare system, managing money, and coping with loss. But spiritual wisdom, that ability to stay close to God as we age, is often the most important kind of wisdom we need and the most overlooked. Many people think of wisdom as intelligence, cleverness, or life experience. And yes, in America especially, that kind of wisdom helps us survive. Knowing how to manage Medicare, how to talk to doctors, how to avoid scams or budget on a fixed income. But spiritual wisdom is something else. It's quieter. It's rooted in faith. It's the kind of wisdom that keeps our hearts at peace, even when our bodies grow weak and our memories fade. In the Gospel of Luke, we read about a woman who shouted out to Jesus, "Blessed is the mother who gave you birth." And Jesus replied, "Rather, blessed are those who hear the word of God and keep it." Luke 11 or 27-28. That answer surprises us. Even being the mother of Jesus is not what made Mary blessed. What made her truly blessed was her deep yes to God and her faithful obedience, quiet, steady, and enduring. I once met a woman in Houston who owned a small nail salon. She told me that every Sunday morning for the past 10 years, she closed her shop to go to Mass, even though Sunday was her busiest day. Her employees didn't understand. Some clients complained, but she would say, "I don't go to church because I'm perfect. I go because I'm weak. I need peace more than I need profits." She wasn't trying to preach. She wasn't being dramatic. She was simply making a wise decision. And that's what spiritual wisdom often looks like. Not a grand gesture, but a small, steady choice in favor of God over and over again. Another wise man I know is a grandfather in Orange County. Each morning, he stands in front of his refrigerator, makes the sign of the cross, and reads one Bible verse taped there. His favorite is from Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He told me, "My mind isn't what it used to be, but those words remind me that I'm not alone today." That's wisdom too, not memorizing books of the Bible, but remembering who you belong to. I once asked a group of seniors, "What does wisdom look like in your life?" Their answers were simple and profound. Knowing when to keep quiet during a family argument. Letting my grandchildren teach me how to use the phone, even when I get frustrated. Praying for people who hurt me instead of complaining about them. Not needing to win every discussion, just needing to stay loving. These are not things you'll find in textbooks, but they are signs of hearts that have walked with God for a long time. I remember an elderly woman with arthritis in both hands. She couldn't hold a full rosary anymore, but she still kept a single decade in her pocket. Every night she would pray slowly, one bead at a time. Her grandchildren were watching cartoons in the other room. She didn't scold them to be quiet. She simply prayed. One night I asked, "Is it hard to keep going?" She said, "Of course, but I want my last words on earth to be a prayer. That way I'll already be halfway to heaven." That's spiritual wisdom, not avoiding struggle, but staying rooted in grace through it. Someone once asked me, "Father, how can I live more wisely in my old age?" I offered 3 daily habits. 1, morning, begin with the sign of the cross. Offer the day to God before breakfast or the news. Even just saying, "Lord, I'm here," is enough. 2, midday. Read one Bible verse. Keep it simple. Let the Word of God interrupt your routine just for a moment. 3, evening. Look back on the day. What brought you peace? What challenged your patience? Say thank you. Ask forgiveness. Then rest. These 3 short moments can make a big difference. They keep our days centered on God, even if everything else feels busy or uncertain. Some people think that wisdom disappears when we grow forgetful, but I've learned the opposite. True wisdom grows deeper with time, like roots beneath a tree. Even when the branches above seem fragile, the roots are strong and they hold the tree firm. There's a woman in Seattle who told me, "I can't drive anymore, I can't see well enough to read, but I light a candle each morning and just say, 'Jesus, I'm here.'" That is a whole prayer. That is a whole life faith in a single sentence. I once visited a man in hospice care. He was barely speaking. I offered him communion and he held my hand, whispering, "I've forgotten many things, Father, but I remember how to say thank you to God." That's wisdom. Spiritual wisdom is not about knowing all the answers. It's about knowing where to turn when you don't. It's about trusting God with your weakness and letting your faith become gentle and strong like the steady flame of a candle. After Mass one Sunday, I saw an older man struggling to get up from the pew. I offered to help. He waved me off, saying, "If I can still walk, I can still come to church." That one sentence has stayed with me for years, not just because of his determination, but because of what it reveals. A heart that is still choosing God even as the body slows down. That, to me, is the most beautiful expression of spiritual wisdom. Some people think that as they grow older, they have less to offer, but I've learned the opposite is true. As our bodies slow down, our spiritual presence can become stronger, and that presence is often shaped by two quiet but powerful virtues: humility and perseverance. When we were younger, we used to have more control over our children, our work, our homes. Now, many older folks feel like they're watching from the sidelines. But that is exactly where humility begins, in the decision to let go, step back, and let God lead. I remember visiting a Vietnamese grandmother who lived with her son and American daughter-in-law. At first, she told me she felt frustrated. "Father, I want to teach my grandchild to pray, but his mom doesn't understand our faith. She doesn't stop me, but she doesn't join in." I asked her, "What do you do instead?" She smiled. "I just keep living gently. I wake up early to say the rosary before anyone's up. I make lunch for my daughter-in-law when she's tired. I never preach, but I let her see what love looks like." That's humility. She didn't insist on being right. She didn't criticize. She simply became a living gospel in her own home. And after a few months, that daughter-in-law asked her, "Would you tell me more about your church?" Not because of a debate, but because of quiet witness. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking more about others and more about God. It means serving without being noticed, forgiving without being asked, and giving without expecting praise. I know a man who has been cleaning his parish church every Friday for over 15 years. He never asks for help. He never mentions it to anyone. When I asked him once why he does it, he said, "I don't do it for the priest. I do it for Jesus, and Jesus doesn't need to thank me." That response stopped me in my tracks, because most of us, if we're honest, want to be noticed. We want to be appreciated. But true humility doesn't need applause. It finds joy in the hidden places of love. And when humility becomes a habit, it naturally leads to perseverance. Because let's face it, if we don't need to be thanked, we're more likely to keep going. And keeping going, especially when no one sees or understands, is exactly what perseverance looks like. I met an elderly woman once who prayed the rosary every night for her grandson who had left the church years ago. "It's been over a decade," she said. "He doesn't believe anymore, but I do. I believe God hasn't given up on him, so I won't either." She wasn't shouting, she wasn't pleading, she was simply praying, quietly, faithfully, without fail. That's what perseverance looks like in real life. We often admire Saint Monica, the mother of Saint Augustine. She prayed for nearly 30 years for her son to return to God. And not only did Augustine return, he became one of the greatest saints in the church. But we forget what it cost her. Long years of tears, waiting, hoping. Monica never stopped trusting God, even when there was no visible sign of change. Today, I believe there are many Monicas in our parishes, grandparents praying for children and grandchildren. Not with anger, not with guilt, just with gentle, steady hope. Perseverance also shows up in physical ways. I once met a man in his 70s who had Parkinson's disease. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold a cup of tea. But every Sunday he made his way to church, even in the rain. "As long as I can walk," he said, "I will walk toward God. And if one day I can't walk, I'll ask someone to carry me." He didn't say it proudly. He said it as a matter of fact, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And that's what perseverance often is. Not dramatic, just faithful. Some people think you have to do something extraordinary to please God. But the truth is, doing ordinary things with extraordinary love and consistency is often more pleasing than one big moment of glory. Perseverance is showing up again and again. It's reading one Bible verse each morning, even when your eyes are tired. It's saying thank you, God, when your joints hurt. It's calling a neighbor who's lonely, even when your own energy is low. It's smiling when no one smiles back. It's forgiving someone who hurt you 20 years ago. These are small, hidden victories, but heaven notices them all. I once asked a group of elders, "What keeps your faith strong?" One woman said, "I stopped looking for miracles and started seeing blessings." Another man said, "I don't always feel God's presence, but I keep talking to him anyway." That to me is the truest form of faith. Humility and perseverance go hand in hand. Humility says, I don't need to be the center. Perseverance says, I won't give up even if no one sees. Together, they form a heart that stays soft in a hard world. And when our children and grandchildren witness that kind of life, a life of patience, gentleness, steady prayer, they begin to understand what real faith looks like. Not flashy, not loud, but unshakable. One young woman once said to me, "I don't remember any long sermons from my grandmother, but I remember her praying every night. I remember how kind she was even when she was tired. And now when I'm struggling, I try to do what she did." That's how faith gets passed on. Not through perfect words, but through imperfect lives lived with grace. So, to every grandparent, every elder, every person who thinks their time of usefulness has passed, remember this: your witness still matters. Your patience still teaches. Your quiet love is a sermon your family will never forget. And if you ever wonder whether it's working, remember the words of St. Paul: "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest, if we do not give up." You may not see the fruit, but God sees the seeds you're planting, and in His perfect time, He will bring them to life. One Monday morning, I visited an elderly woman recovering from knee surgery. Her leg was wrapped in braces, and her movement was limited, but her face lit up when she saw me. "Father," she said, "I couldn't go to Mass yesterday, but I watched it online. The moment the bells rang at consecration, I felt like I was back in my little church in Vietnam. I can't walk much now, but God still finds His way to me." That moment reminded me of something essential. The Eucharist is the heart of our spiritual life. After we learn to be wise, after we practice humility and perseverance, what keeps us steady is our connection to the Holy Mass and the way we offer our time to God, to others, and to our own soul. Many seniors today face real challenges getting to Mass: chronic pain, unreliable transportation, even weather conditions like snow or extreme heat. But those who understand the meaning of the Eucharist, they find a way. I know a woman in her late 60s named Hoa who lives near Seattle. Every Sunday, she drives nearly 40 minutes to attend a Vietnamese language Mass. Some days, the fog is so thick she gets lost. Once, she arrived just as the final blessing was being given. But instead of turning around, she sat quietly, made a spiritual communion, and whispered, "Lord, I made it." She later told me, "Sometimes I can't receive Jesus in the Eucharist, but I always try to receive Him in my heart." That hunger, that longing to be close to God, is what nourishes her soul through illness, loneliness, and even the loss of loved ones. The Mass is not just about us. It blesses the people we carry in our hearts. I once met a man who brought a basket of fruit every week to church. He would quietly place it at the foot of the statue of Mary and whisper, "Mother, please offer this to God for my children and grandchildren." After Mass, he'd take the fruit to share with neighbors or the elderly in his apartment building. A simple act, but it carried deep meaning. He was offering his time, his care, and his prayers, not just in words, but in action. That's what it means to offer our time to God and let God multiply it for others. I once encouraged a group of seniors to try 3 sacred pauses each day. A few weeks later, they shared what happened. First, a few minutes for God in the morning. Before the TV, before breakfast. Some read a verse, some just sat in silence. One woman said, "I didn't think 10 minutes would matter, but it changed my whole day. When I got frustrated later, I remembered what I had prayed in the morning." Second, a few minutes for others. One man made a habit of calling a sick friend after lunch. A grandmother recorded herself reading simple Vietnamese poems for her English-speaking grandchildren. Her grandson replied, "I love your poems, Grandma." Third, a few minutes for the self. In the evening, they turned off the phone, sipped tea, and watched the sunset. no news, no distractions. One woman said, I could feel my heart slowing down and my sleep became more peaceful. These 3 sacred pauses for God, for others, for yourself are not difficult, but they reshape the day. They remind us that time is a gift, and how we use it says everything about what we value most. Once I brought Holy Communion to a man on hospice. He could barely speak. He held my hand and whispered, Father, I spent my whole life chasing things. Now I wish I had just spent more time with God. His words struck me deeply, not with guilt, but with a quiet urgency. If you can still attend Mass, go. If not, watch it online and offer your heart. If you can't watch, then simply say, Jesus, I'm here. God hears that prayer. In fact, it might be the most beautiful prayer you ever say. The Eucharist isn't a reward for the perfect. It's a lifeline for the weak. And when we receive Jesus, physically or spiritually, we are sent out to bring him to others. Where do we go? Sometimes just across the hallway. I know an elderly woman who started a cookie ministry. Every week, she bakes a small batch and brings them to a local shelter for women. They call her Grandma Cookies. She told me they probably forget the cookies, but I hope they remember someone cared. That's what the Eucharist does. It fills us with love, and that love wants to spill over. And as we live this way, rooted in the Eucharist, mindful of how we spend our time, we become a gentle light to those around us. One family told me that during a long, painful, and full argument about inheritance, the grandmother said only one thing. I prayed at Mass this morning for peace in our family. Please speak gently for my sake. They all stopped, not because they agreed, but because they loved her, and they knew she loved them. As we age, the world often tells us we're becoming less useful. But in God's eyes, our prayers, our wisdom, and our witness grow more valuable with each passing year. When we die, we don't take wealth or trophies. We take only the love we've given and the time we offered to God and to others. I once heard an old priest say, when we meet God, he won't ask how smooth our skin was, but whether our hands carried the scent of service. So we come full circle. Wisdom teaches us to choose God. Humility teaches us to step aside so that others and God can shine. Perseverance teaches us to keep going, even when no one sees. All 3 find their strength in the Eucharist and in the sacred offering of our time. One day, when we are gone, we won't need our children to say fancy words at our funeral. Let them say simply, Grandpa taught me how to make the sign of the cross. Grandma never missed Mass. Dad always prayed for us, even when we forgot. That's enough. That's when heaven will smile. Because God and Mary will know, another faithful soul has come home quietly, humbly, and with joy.